Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Vizard, News Editor at Marketing Week and your moderator for today's webinar, where we've partnered with Cision to discuss and break down their 2020 State of the Media report. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to kick off this discussion with a panel of great industry professionals. For those who aren't familiar, a little background on the State of the Media report. Each year, Cision conducts the survey by emailing its database of members, which consists of media professionals, influencers and bloggers. The 2020 survey collected more than 3,200 journalist responses from North and South America, Europe and Asia, making this their biggest yet. With a pandemic dominating the global media agenda, Cision also decided to reach back out to journalists to find out how COVID-19 has affected them. In today's webinar, we'll discuss some of the bigger themes that came out of this year's report, including COVID-19's overall impact on the media. Distrust in the media continues to decline globally in the eyes of journalists, highlighting the year's findings. Technology and the media, and how PR professionals can improve their relationship with journalists. A little bit of housekeeping just before we get into it. We're tweeting using the hashtag SOTM2020, so you can keep an eye on the Cision UK Twitter handle, and we'd love to hear from you guys too. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions of the panelists. There's a Q&A panel on the webinar if you want to put those in there, and I can put as many as possible to the panelists at the end. And if you want to listen again or share it with colleagues, there will be an on-demand copy of the recording made available afterwards. Just before we get started, I'll introduce you to our brilliant panel of speakers. First up, we have Rosie Hopegood, who is the freelance journalist writing for The Telegraph, Vice and The Guardian. We have Matt Cross, who is head of B2B at Hotwire. Ian Murray, who is Executive Director at the Society of Editors, and Eleanor Mills, who is Chairperson at Women in Journalism, and Cheryl Douglas, Global Director of Media Research Operations at Cision. And I will hand over now to Ian, who can begin the discussion. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you straight away to Marketing Week and to Cision for giving us this opportunity to have this webinar and this conversation on the publication of the 2020 State of the Media report from Cision, something I look forward to coming out, and I find it very formative every single year that's there. So I'll be comparing this part of it, hopefully, and bringing in our speakers and putting my O2 penneth in as we go along. So let's look at the first of our slides and the first area that we're looking at, which is the COVID-19's impact. We couldn't avoid that, of course, and Cision and put in a special look at that, following on from all the other questions they'd asked of people, and got the results into that. And as the report says, which is out today, the whirlwind of COVID-19 has changed everything in our day-to-day lives, and of course that means the media. And the survey found that stories previously in the works are now on hold to make room for the coronavirus news. And it also highlighted that in a busy landscape, emailing as a pitching preference actually remains the same. So I'd just like to ask, know that now that COVID-19 has taken over the media, do we as journalists and others believe that this has added a whole new set of challenges for journalists? And from my own observations and talking with the media and from my own point of view there, I would say that it's exacerbated, it's enhanced those challenges. I think one of the great challenges is to keep the public informed, to keep them on top of everything, to answer the questions they can amongst this fog of information which is coming out. In this fog now, I call it a fog because there's so much information that it's almost overkill, and the role of a journalist is always to provide easy to understand on the very difficult topics which this is. And I think there's another challenge there which exists, or two challenges, shall we say. One that always exists when at times of great crisis, and we've seen it previously when there's been such terrible things as wars taking place, and that's a kind of like almost information overload and fatigue. With the public, I get so much information, it reaches, I'll just have the headlines, and then because the rest of it is too overwhelming, and you know that newsrooms then are actually having to try and find fresh ways to bring this information, because it's important information out, as well as other news as well, looking for the positive amongst the negative. And the other thing that I think is important to bring out is the challenges that's there. is very much so, and talking to editors and others within the news business, this has been coming through. It's that we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. In other words, we need to ask the right questions. The public wants to know about important issues. We need to hold government and others up to account and say, why is this happening? Why hasn't this happened? But we must at the same time make sure that we don't destroy the total trust in government and others that are there, and that we're actually being proactively part of the solution that's there. I mean, those are some of my views on that. Rosie, can I bring you in? What do you think with the COVID-19, how it's all changed?
Yeah, I think it's obviously having a huge impact, and not being able to get out and do interviews face-to-face puts you at a huge disadvantage. Not being able to meet contacts, also just things like not being able to send photographers out means we've got to find stories where there are already good pictures available. News teams that perhaps aren't used to working alone won't be able to bounce ideas off one another. Yeah, it's definitely had an enormous impact.
Yeah, I completely recognise that, because having run many a newsroom, it is something like that, isn't it? In the newsroom, people bounce ideas off each other. They overhear conversations. They come in and say, that's the second or third time I've heard that in the last couple of days, and I think there's something in that. And also you can have people actually shouting up, actually, I don't think that's true because, and acts as that kind of balance. And yet we're isolated as well, and having to use all this technologically. Cheryl, from your point of view, have you seen the major changes that are taking place and challenges?
Yeah, and I think everything that we've said so far regarding accountability is absolutely critical, holding people to account, but also how PRs can help with this in looking at the media in terms of, what I normally have coffee with my contacts, I normally email them little snippets. It's about actually what do they need now, and it's about a balancing act in terms of we want news, we want to know what's happening, but also let's have a look a bit deeper. Are there positivity stories out there? And not forgetting the local media, the local news. I think from people I've spoken to, local news is really becoming important again. I mean, it's always been important, but ever so now, what's happening in your neighbourhood, what's happening in your village, in your town, and how PRs and the journalists can work together on that when we're in a lockdown situation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I think it's vitally important from the journalist point of view and from all the media's point of view that they're having news from trusted sources, that people aren't wasting their time, and we'll come on to this later, and that the use of trusted databases as well. If you want to make sure that you're getting the message across to the sources that are being trusted, databases, dare I say, like Cision, are an absolute godsend at this time. If you didn't have access to those, it would be an awful lot harder. Matt, can I bring you in on that from a PR and comms perspective? Have you seen a change in pitching preferences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's been a fundamental shift. We've been quickly guiding clients towards what new opportunities there might be, but also cancelling them in some cases away from earned media altogether, where certain types of campaigns just shouldn't be run. But I just wanted to pick up actually on something that Cheryl mentioned about, community groups. And I think when I put my B2B hat on, those community groups are very much peer groups, and at the centre of peer groups in the B2B world are trade publications, and we're really still seeing strong demand for non-pandemic stories, and I think that's a reflection of the fact that although businesses do have critical challenges today presented by the pandemic, those trade audiences still face the same challenges that they did 4 to 6 months ago, and in some cases they're actually accelerating. So if you look at something like digital transformation, for instance, or engaging diverse workforces through remote working infrastructure, those trends are actually beginning to accelerate. So they're still facing those challenges, and it's up to the trade media to still be catering for that. So whilst we remain sensitive to media priorities, we really are closely tracking how those priorities are shifting for different audiences as well.
Absolutely, and I can, from the news and media point of view, going back on what I mentioned beforehand about the fact of that fatigue setting in and the need for people to have information and news and content, which isn't to do with COVID-19. It's all consuming at the moment, but life will move on no matter what the situation will be. And one of the most important things, and why governments have recognised that journalists are part of the essential workforce, not just in getting the messages over about COVID-19, but also in continuing to picking up on Cheryl's point of view, about continuing to talk about local communities, that local life is continuing under different conditions, but it is actually going on, and it's not a complete wasteland out there with that. So thanks very much on that one. Let's move on now to the next area, which the report touches on, which is the media ecosystem. And it's a fascinating read, this report, folks. Please do visit it. It is out today. And the media ecosystem in 2020 continues to be challenging for journalists, says the report. The report found that fake news and attacks on freedom of the press are less of a challenge this year. And you can see the figures that are there that you go on. There's still something like, I think, 56% of journalists that are asked, or recipients that are said that they believe that fake that it was still a challenge and attacks on press freedom that were there, but this was dropping. And while staffing and general access to resources continues to be a mounting challenge, and I think we would certainly, Eleanor, if I can bring you on that, does that gel with you?
Yes, I think that the massive problem at the moment, everyone you talk to, is advertising. There's a report out from Ender's Analysis today, which is saying that the outbreaks cost the newspaper and magazine industry about 1.25 billion in lost advertising. And other revenues this year, 5,000 journalist jobs at risk. That's their latest analysis, which came out today. And everyone I talk to is just talking about how this will massively accelerate the shift from print to digital. That this is really fundamental for all the media groups in terms of actually financing the kind of trusted journalism that people really want during the COVID crisis. And I think that what this is really accentuating for the whole media ecosystem, the COVID problem, is that massive gap between the absolute key worker kind of essential nature of the news gathering that journalists are doing and the increasing lack of funds coming into these kind of big media organisations to fund that. And I think that we're hitting that crisis much quicker than we thought that we would. And Claire Enders today has actually emailed the bosses of Google and Facebook saying that they've got to the terrible paradox of quality news provision hardly needs repeating. The news industry is playing a vital role in our national global emergency, yet it's unable to generate enough revenue to sustain its essential activities. So I think if we're talking about the media ecosystem and the state of the media, the massive problem is quite how we go on funding things.
And absolutely, and Cheryl, even before the COVID-19 crisis that we're in, looking back at the last year, I mean, what do you believe have been the biggest challenges for journalists in the last 12 months?
Well, I think it's been twofold. It does touch on the advertising, but it's measuring the success of an article. So publications looking at ways they want to see the return on an article, whether it's through increased subscriptions, the impact, the revenue, but also is it bringing in new readership? And I think second, what it goes hand in hand is with social and influencers, the impact they're having. But also you want to target your new readers, whether it's no longer generational, it hasn't been for ages. So it's how are we attracting? Journalists are sitting there thinking, okay, I'm writing this story, but I need it to resonate, not just in print, digital. I mean, one publishing house has Snapchat editors to attract that audience and then bring them on the journey with them as they evolve into that publication. So I think for journalists, it's incredibly difficult in terms of getting their news story right to absolutely resonate with such a wide audience. And that's quite a sweeping statement because not every story is relevant to that. But the majority is in terms of how are you attracting new readers, how are you going to keep them and how are you going to monetize it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I know that the report, and we'll be touching on it a little bit later, of course, under some of the other headlines here. But that's exactly true, and newsrooms are thinking about how can we've got what we think is a really good item here, a really good news story, but how can we actually now parcel this up so that attract the attention of and through to the different kinds of audiences that are out there, making it suitable for different platforms that are there. And sometimes thinking, this is something for the Snapchat audience, this is something for that, but it may not be for other audiences. And I think that PRs can be thinking, organisations can be thinking, and doing some of that helping out and thinking it through and saying, this is something that is good for Snapchat or TikTok even, which is now being used, and all those kinds of things that are there. It's fascinating and quite right that this was already moving, quite rapidly in this direction, and picking up on what you'd said there about this challenge, and it has been seen as a race for a while, the race to actually make the digital platforms pay. An awful lot of them are still free before the print platforms become untenable, and then one hopes the print platforms will always continue, but then it would help and assist in that way. And that race has been speeded up so much by what's gone on, of course, in the last couple of months and that. So does anyone else want to come in on that at all? Rosie, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the current model where tech firms are sucking up a lot of the profits from the media industry is definitely going to have to be reconsidered post-corona. I know that NUJ, the National Union of Journalists, has already put a call out for a windfall tax from tech companies to stop newspapers from going under. And I think this is definitely something that's going to have to be looked at once we're through the other side of this crisis.
And we've seen news today, overnight, from Australia, where the government have said that they are, introducing the demands that the tech giants will pay an acceptable amount. I'm not sure what the technical term for it would be, the producers of the content providers that's there. And I think the French have come in with a similar kind of thing. So we'll see how that basically moves forward. So, that neatly brings us on to our next slide, which is bias. It's got a wonderful quote, and which is picked up in the report, of all media is biased because it's run by humans. Although we will get onto technology quite soon, and maybe some of it isn't run by humans. But that's the quote there. All media is biased because it's run by humans. The quote is from a journalist respondent to the survey, and the theme of media bias was something that reoccurred all the way through the survey that's there. And Eleanor, what do you think journalists themselves think about media bias? Do they recognise it as such? Do they feel there's a problem or it's an issue there?
Well, I think that in a media landscape where there's a big plurality of voices, like we have in the UK, that it's kind of the bias of the publication that you're buying is kind of built in when you buy it. If you pick up the Guardian, you're going to get something different from what you get if you pick up the Telegraph. So I think in some ways everybody in the UK particularly understands what kind of a bias they're buying with the news that they buy. I think that where there's been a lot of interest has been actually around television, because in television here we're meant to have a much more kind of straight TV world. We know when we buy a newspaper that comes with a particular point of view. TV is meant to be more straight, and we saw with Brexit that the BBC got into a real tangle because they thought that they were being very kind of straight and impartial about it, and actually there was nobody on Newsnight who voted Brexit, and that they had a definite kind of liberal southern kind of metropolitan bias. So I think that it's made everybody think more carefully about that. I think that when it comes to newspapers, that isn't such a problem because it's so integral to the product, and that people do understand that.
I think you're right, and I think it's understanding the word bias as well. Bias often, if you have a look at a lot of articles or broadcasts as well, but in particular, shall we say, it's a kind of like quite right for those producing them would point to them and say, no, they're balanced. They're balanced there because they're giving both sides of the argument. They're giving everyone the opportunity to. But often the accusation can be made or is made because it's the subject and the matter that you choose, the items that you choose to talk about, and the items that you choose not to talk about in the way that it is. And so it's that: is it bias or is it just news selection? And as you say, although it's considered to be a new thing, the bias with all people are talking in their bubbles. They're only getting news from sources that they actually agree with. Well, that's gone on with newspapers for 100 years because you buy the paper that you feel most comfortable with and you read the paper in that kind of sense. TV is under regulation. It has to be unbiased, and that's where you get this. I'm not sure that the public particularly get that there is a difference in law. There is a difference about that. That newspapers have the right under law to be partial. And to actually upset and annoy people. It's actually written into law, which is I think sometimes we do quite well, but there we are. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that from any point of view about the bias? Did you see things that make you sort of like roll your eyes at all?
Every day, Ian. I think
to do with bias.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think I don't entirely agree. I think we are all part of the industry because of the roles that we play, and but I'm not 100% signed up to the idea that the public knows what they're buying into. I think sometimes they are just buying into the legacy of whatever their parents bought and their parents' bought, and are being fed content and being fed stories which maybe they could get a viewpoint if they bought something else. I don't always believe that they know what they're buying into, to be honest. So I guess that would be my view on that.
I think that really underestimates the perspicacity of the British public. I think your average Sun reader or Mirror reader knows exactly what they're getting. I think that's to underestimate the taste of the people who are buying their media.
This is what we like. A bit of contention there between our panelists. That's absolutely fine. I recognise myself as a human being that I have my inbuilt biases. I will when asked about this subject by folks not in the industry, I will say, well, yes, because exactly that, we are all human beings and we are biased. However, journalists, if they're good at their trade, and 99.9% of them are very good at their trade, they leave their bias at the door, and they come in and they produce a professional, impartial, balanced story to the best of their ability. Now, others may disagree with that, but I go in there and I know, journalists who are of a left-wing persuasion, but work for you could say right-wing publishers and publications, and they say, well, it's the job. I leave my feelings at the door, and that's the columnists, of course, and that's different when they're writing from their own opinions. But there we are. I mean, the report goes on to say that the tricky thing, one of the comments is that about bias, is that even with bias training, human beings are terrible at identifying their own biases. And I thought about that, and I thought, surely that doesn't apply to me. I suppose it does, really. Yes, it does. I try very hard to recognise my own biases, but there we are, and I can't help it if I support West Bromwich Albion. It's as simple as that. I'll let that one sink in. So anyway, the next moving on is to distrust in the media. And when I read the report first of all on this, and it said that it's 59% of journalists believe that there's distrust in the media. It continues, but that's good news. I did a double take. And then realised that from the report that in 2017, an amazing 91% of people in my profession believe that there was this problem of distrust in the media, and it's now a mere 59%. But it's still quite a massive problem. I mean, so it's actually a decrease. And it is a positive a step in the positive in the right direction. But Rosie, can I ask you, what examples of this have you seen in your own work, or have you seen the opposite? Do you think have you seen a reduction in folks saying I don't trust anyone in the media?
I don't think I've particularly noticed a tangible difference in either direction when it comes to my own work. But I do definitely think that something like Corona is going to drive people away from social media and more of the false news end of the spectrum back towards traditional media outlets. So that can only be a good thing, you would hope.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because I mean, particularly during this time with COVID-19 crisis, it's crucial to ensure that content is as accurate as possible. And the survey found out that journalists ranked accuracy above revenue or exclusivity, that they felt that was the most important thing there. And we know from reports that are coming in from the news groups that more and more people than ever are turning to recognise news brands, be it from the BBC, which, as Cheryl was saying earlier, right down to the local paper, are seeing a huge boost in numbers that are coming to them. To find out what is going on, underscoring what people such as the Society of Editors have been saying for a long time. Look, stop knocking the lack of trust in mainstream media. Actually, you should be underscoring it because it is the only show in town when it comes to proper edited news, balanced, researched, and regulated in that way. So, but there's obviously still a lot of work to be done there. What do you think, Eleanor, that in our profession that we can do?
Well, I've had quite an interesting view on this because I've been ill. I think I had the COVID for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Gosh.
And there's nothing like sitting there feeling really terrible yourself to really make you very picky about the news sources that you indulge in. And when you're sitting there, I got ill on the same day as Boris Johnson, and then he was going into hospital, and I was sitting there thinking, I had a really, really high temperature, and I was thinking, oh my God, am I heading that way myself? So I actually massively, as a massive news junkie usually, I really, really decreased the amount of news sources I looked at, and I looked at the BBC website not very often. And I really tried to kind of minimise the scary things. And actually the worst things that I saw were definitely WhatsApp and kind of rather frightened, over-concerned friends who would circulate things on social media, WhatsApp, and you'd look at it and you'd think, I really hope that's not true. And then you'd realise kind of 2 hours later that it was being debunked on the main sites, that it was absolute rubbish. So it's over. I've always been, as you know, Ian, a fervent believer, and as also on the Society of Editors board, in trusted journalism and the importance of trusted sources. But it was really brought home to me in the most visceral way of my whole life how important it was to trust the information that you were getting, and the absolute importance of that when you're frightened, when you're sick, when you're looking around thinking, what is going to happen to me? You really want something that you trust, and not these terrible rumours flying around saying, I won't even go there. But it was really interesting how the trust of the BBC and the things that we've always known tell us the right stuff became incredibly important.
Absolutely, and you're on the road to recovery, we hope.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely fine now. I got better, but it's a very. I think the other thing I'd really like to say is about tone at the moment, and talking to, I used to edit the Sunday Night Times magazine, talking to colleagues there, talking to friends at Vogue and some of the glossy magazines. The tone of the kinds of things you can put out now is really difficult, and particularly with publications which have a lead time kind of gap. So you're maybe doing an interview and it's not going to actually appear in people's papers for 10 days, because things are shifting so hard and so fast, and you don't know what will have happened by the time it comes out. I think judging the tone at the moment is really difficult.
Yeah, I can just see. Matt, can I bring you in on this? And what do you think? Do you think we should be pleased with ourselves in journalism that it's gone from 91% to 59%, or do you think that there's an awful lot more that we can do to build that trust in our profession?
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. I think this. That figure obviously is a reflection of how the media perceives themselves as being trusted. I think what's useful is to look at it in the context the wider context, which is there is a massive erosion of trust in general, but particularly trust in the establishment. Trust levels continue to decline, and in some media, or rather some media have been lumped in as the establishment as well. So media in some cases are seen as the establishment. So when you're seeing an overall erosion in trust in the establishment, and media are part of that, that becomes a problem. And it actually presents a pretty unique challenge, because whilst holding the establishment to account, which is exactly, absolutely right and exactly what the media should be doing, it could also be, if you like, fanning the flames and inadvertently reducing trust in themselves. So my view is that there's a clear requirement, or maybe even, an opportunity for media brands to better set their stall out, be clear to their readers about what, their main objectives are, what their stance is, what their overall role is in this, in this world. And I think you look at brands like Vice, for instance, which is a really great example of this, very clear where they're coming from and what their angle is. But there's also a lot of quite poor examples out there, where some media, the role just seems to be, a platform for clickbait. And that is, very much at the low end. But you really have to work hard, I think, to differentiate from those, and also show your role against, against the establishment and holding them to account, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yes, it certainly does, and I think it goes back to what I was touching on beforehand about that careful path to be trod in being part of the solution and not trying to be too much more part of the problem. And I think it is that getting the balance right between asking the important questions, but weighing up as to whether this is some of the headlines that there are going to be of help. I mean, you can't hide the truth. It's as simple as that. You cannot hide the truth. And occasionally I would have sucked teeth and gone, I think that was a question to be asked when we're coming out of this. I'd rather know where we're going than who was to blame right back there, kind of thing. But we can see just how awful it is in other parts of the world. I mean, just look at the bear pit going on over in the United States, where trust appears to have broken down completely between large sections of the media and the administration in the White House, and it's a bear garden. And on the other level, you've got governments that are imposing in places like Hungary, sadly, and other places, saying if you attempt to say anything or write anything that doesn't fall into line, undermines what the government is saying on this, you're off to jail. I mean, it's just So although we're not perfect, and occasionally it goes one way or the other, it's blooming good effort, I think, overall at the moment. So moving on now to the subject we touched on before of technology and how that's having an impact on the media landscape, and that was reported on the report. 41% of journalists agree that social media algorithms will change the way they work the most, up 3% from 2019 in the State of the Media report. Journalists now require an understanding of how social media and its algorithms work, leaving many modern journalists with competing interests. Social platforms are all about speed, reach and versus accuracy. Cheryl, if I can just come to you, as technology becomes more advanced, how do you think it will affect the media, and what steps do you think will journalists have to take to prove their relevance in the industry?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, it is a challenge, but it's also something to be welcomed in terms of reacting to existing stories and being able to engage with your audience. I think people originally were really scared of the algorithms and AI, but let's face it, the robot still can't write a really good sarcastic piece like a true journalist can. So I think for journalists, it's to look at this as a positive and take the technology and start engaging with different types of audiences. And technology will also help shape the data and the traffic. So whilst technology can help shape a piece that you're writing in terms of which way, who should be reading it, what data you can provide in it, there's no escaping the fact that good journalism goes hand in hand with the technology to get it out there and get it out there on different platforms.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Rosie, can you see a robot taking over your job?
I would definitely hope not, Ian. I think, in my experience, most newsrooms still do tend to be quite split down the middle when it comes to the online and the print sections, and it can feel like there's a bit of a chasm between the two. But I think if coronavirus is going to affect the print industry the way it's being predicted, then there'll be a lot of journalists looking to up their skill sets online. I think that the problem that media organisations face is just how quickly these algorithms can change and how much of an impact that can have on the reach that they're getting for their stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on, understanding all of that, which is, again is, as soon as you begin to understand something about technology, it moves on. So you need to get ahead of the curve, which brings us on to, the whole of pitching is understanding all of that. And there's a section in the report, fascinating section about that, and saying that, as journalists continue to get inundated with news, crucial PR professionals distribute press releases in ways that will resonate with the media. And also often journalists are bombarded with relevant pitches that aren't tailored to them or their publication, which makes it a waste of, everyone's time. And I think we all know things about, making sure that when crafting a pitch, you need to make it relevant. And timing is everything, knowing when to actually send it, understanding the frequency of reporting. And then there's, a quarter of reporters receive 51 to 100 pitches a week. Bear that in mind. So PR outreach needs to be doing whatever it can to stand out. The survey also found that reporters have a real desire for context around why a journalist should care about your news, and they want to know about it because why should their readers or their viewers know about it? So, what else? If I go to Matt, what else can PR professionals do? Do you think to go that extra mile and ensure their pitch is looked at and their story is covered?
Yeah, I don't think this has necessarily changed since when I started in PR in 2004. I think it's probably the similar sorts of things, and just the sheer volume of communications that journalists are receiving, obviously. There's two things for me. One, make sure you're reading around the topic. So are you and your clients, are you going to be taking a differentiated or a contrarian view on the topic that's already taking place? If you're not, then you're probably just adding to the noise, and therefore, what is the value? But also making sure you're reading around the journalists themselves. Is this topic that you're pitching them? Is it their core beat? Can you pick up on a theme or maybe an unanswered question from a piece that they've written before? And have you actually got all the necessary elements? When you look at the report, it actually shows that customers, academics, known experts and one-to-one interviews are the most trusted sources for journalists. So if you're not ticking at least 2 or 3 of those boxes, I'd say you're not going to stand out, and you're going to just make it harder. Even if the journalist is interested in the story, you're going to make it harder to follow through and actually convert that into something valuable for everyone.
Absolutely. And Ella, does that resonate with you?
Yes, I think what you said there was absolutely spot on. Certainly as an editor, you're getting pitches from endless freelance journalists, people internally, as well as PRs, and they can kind of fall to the bottom of the queue. But what you learn as an editor is that there are certain PRs who never waste your time, and therefore whose emails you'll always open. And I used to have a few that I knew if they emailed me, they would be giving me something that would be, a cover story, or that would be really worth my while looking at. And that they wouldn't be pitching it to me unless they knew it would work somewhere in my magazine really effectively. And I think that's also about thinking about slots. If you're pitching to a busy editor, rather than going, I thought you might want to cover this somewhere, if you can go, last week in your Me and My Motor slot, or in the Life and the Day, you did something about this, and I really think that this would be perfect for these reasons, then you'll have a much better chance of it making it work. And I think at the moment, like random pictures around kind of products that people can't buy because the shops are shut. All of those things should be a complete no-no, particularly when you have to understand that editors' inboxes are like overflowing to a degree where they can't bear it. One of the panelists before we came on air was saying she'd had so many emails this morning she just couldn't get through them. I think really think about how your pitch is going to stand out, and pitch those people rarely and when you really mean it, and then they'll look at your emails.
Yeah, very good points there. And Rosie, if I can come to you, do you think when you receive a release that you treat it differently when it's coming from, say, like a well-known brand as opposed to a new startup that's trying to get some recognition in the media?
I think there can be a bit of a difference. Yes, I think sometimes working with a smaller brand, they might be offering you something that hasn't gone out to as many other journalists. Like an interesting case study or some expert commentary that hasn't just been sent out to, you know, a pre-established large media list. I must say, I think 51 to 100 pitches a week is definitely quite an underestimate. I think most people probably get that a day. I feel like my inbox is waging a constant war on it to get them down. And yeah, like Eleanor was saying, there's definitely a few PRs that I know will always send me something that's useful. And I actually have a folder on my email of useful PRs that I go to when I'm looking for things.
Oh, that's right. Well, yeah. Do they know that they're in your useful PR good list?
Probably, because I'm always emailing them, or
they probably know. They probably know. Fantastic.
Yeah, I think they know because they're the ones who get an answer from their pitch.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A badge of honour, like an old Blue Peter badge. And we're coming to the end of our time on the panel before we open it up for questioning. So just moving on there to strengthening the relationship and writing that pitch and knowing your journalist audience go hand in hand, obviously. And Cision asked journalists what the number one thing PR pros could do to help, and 37% responded, understand my target audience and what they find relevant. And I think that picks up on a number of things that you've been saying there, Rosie and Eleanor, about those kind of things. And in the UK specifically, the jury's still out whether PR pros understand journalists' target audience and what they want. In total, 68% chose neutral or disagreed, didn't know. So this shows the importance of customizing pitches and taking the time to send individual emails rather than blasting out a mass email list to everyone. And, you know, Rosie, almost 60% of UK respondents prefer to receive pitches on a Monday by email. Is that when you like to receive your pitch, on a Monday, first thing when you get in, got that first cup of coffee in hand?
I suppose if you are sending your pitch on a Monday morning, you're going to be fighting against a lot of other pitches. But I do think towards the end of the week, absolutely should be when you're towards the beginning of the week, should be when you're sending your pitches. And mornings are probably times that most journalists are kind of gearing up for the day and thinking about what they're going to write. So yeah, that does make sense for sure.
Yeah, I think the survey does show that most journalists prefer to get it in the earlier part of the week, although much surprise, it does show that some would like to get it over. I don't mind getting it on a Saturday and a Sunday, so there we are, so this kind of thing. Matt, what else do you think the PR professionals could do to strengthen their relationship with journalists?
Well, I've always found that beer and donuts goes quite a long way. In all seriousness, I mean, you know, the stat there was about understanding a journalist beat, and I think taking advantage of the opportunities that you get as a PR when you're seeing journalists face to face, either putting, you know, this is tricky at the moment, obviously, but getting a specific time in the diary to go out for a beer or just to meet up and just have a coffee and just to talk about what would really appeal to people, or if you're on a media trip, use those downtimes to really get to know people. And I think the other thing is being able to show support of particular journalists that you're targeting as well. And by that I mean amplifying and sharing their content. I was reading an article on Wired the other day by Matt Reynolds. It was a really great piece. It was around how we make the climate gains stick in the post-pandemic world. And it's a really great piece. And I tweeted it and I tagged him and he replied to say thanks. Now, we're not best friends yet, but we're getting there. And at least, I'm showing that I'm supporting him and that I believe in what he's writing. And I think without that, you're just a name coming into an inbox as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking as someone who's always been partial to beer and donuts, the Homer Simpson approach to media relations can only agree. What you're really saying, and I completely agree with, is that human touch. It's that no matter how much there are robots out there, no matter how much there are algorithms and that working out there, it's that human touch and contact and knowing to know who you can trust and get a sensible answer from out there and building on those relationships. So that brings to an end, to mercifully for everyone fed up with the sound of my voice, that section of going forward. So thank you so much, everyone, for that step. But I'm going to hand over back now to Sarah Vizard to take over the question and answers.
Thanks, Ian. That was all really interesting. Thanks, guys. I think I took the survey, so it's interesting to hear what all the results are and you guys discussing them. And we've had quite a few questions come in, so I'll try and sort of fire a few at you over the next sort of 10 minutes or so. I'll see how many we can get through. I don't know who's going to be best placed to answer some of these, so I'll maybe just sort of throw them out and you can all jump on me, or if there's a silence, I'll pick one of you out. So we've got a couple of questions about sort of pitching, and people asking if they should be adjusting their pitching during the current climate. Do you think that there's a broader shift, and is the age of phoning journalists dead? I think I have a problem because I'm not in the office so much, so my phone doesn't seem to ring as often now as it used to, and I get a lot more emails. But is that a general thing, do people think?
I can come in on that. I think at the moment that email, everything's online, isn't it? So it's people are endlessly on Zoom calls or going through emails, and so it's kind of probably email. I think it again goes down to the relationship. I had a really good conversation with an old PR friend of mine a few days ago, and it was actually really nice that she called up, because I've been doing so many emails that it was really nice to actually speak to a human being. So I think that slightly depends on how well how well you know people, but there is something about the endless grind of the kind of, you come back to your inbox and there's another 50 emails there, and I think at the moment you really got to make them stand out. And that they really shouldn't be. I think you need to really ask yourself a question before you send an email to a very busy journalist at the moment, thinking, are they really going to be interested in this today? You know, the whole country's in lockdown, all the shops are shut. If it's a consumer thing, if it's not in a supermarket, probably no one's going to be able to buy it unless you can get it online. Just really, really think about what kinds of things you're reading in the newspapers or that are working online at the moment, and think if that's going to be relevant. And going back to what we were saying about algorithms and AI, because of the shift to social media and the fact that all newspapers are now trying to get more traffic to their stories, it's amazing how if you're pitching a story about somebody who's got a massive Twitter following or an Instagram following, you'd be amazed at how poignant and piquant that is for editors who are looking for more clicks. So if you've got somebody who's got a good following on social, but perhaps isn't that well known outside it, really make a play of that, because that really helps kind of say traditional print media organisations who are trying to ramp up their influence on social or get more traffic to their stories.
This is probably a slightly quicker question, but people are asking if you prefer pictures from in-house PRs or from agencies, or does it not make a difference?
I don't think that would particularly make a difference for me, but yeah, similar to what Eleanor was saying, I'd be happy to receive a phone call from a PR that I had a relationship with and who had thought about whatever they're pitching being something that I could definitely use. But I don't think it would make a difference whether they were in-house or with an agency, to be honest.
No, I would agree with you. A question about print circulations, which are obviously sort of declining at the moment, as people are not able to get out to the shops and buy them. Do you think that people will go back to buying print once lockdown restrictions are eased, or is this just a quickening of a move to digital?
I think the decline in the print circulations at the moment is really quite terrifying for a lot of media groups. And I've spoken to quite a lot of very senior executives in the last week or so. And to a man and a woman, they are pretty appalled at how quickly it's sinking. Kind of things going down by like 20, 30% just in the first couple of weeks of circulations in the first couple of weeks of COVID in terms of the print. It's really hard for people to actually get out and buy papers. I think it's really worrying, and I think that the margins on kind of the print stuff were getting quite tight anyway, particularly on, as the circulations fall, then you can charge less for the advertising, and you're very dependent if you're producing big kind of glossy print magazines, then that's really dependent on the advertising revenue, and when that goes, then the viability of those outlets becomes impossible. The ES magazine shut, didn't it, for a while? I've spoken to people at various different magazine groups who were all sounding extremely worried about the futures of their actual physical products. And I think that we're going to see, I don't want to sound like the voice of doom, but I think that we are going to see a quicker consolidation of those kind of print products into digital very, very, quickly particularly on the heels of COVID. Because however big the organisations are, they just don't have pockets deep enough to deal with an advertising decline. I mean, the Enders figures are looking like advertising decline by 80-90% in some places.
And another
thing, it's catastrophic.
Yeah. I was just going to say another thing to flag there is that if there are fewer adverts in the paper, there's also journalists are have to fill those pages, or they're going to have to cut the number of pages in a paper or a magazine for that issue. So that's another challenge that journalists are up against at the moment.
Well, and the paginations everywhere are becoming incredibly thin. I just picked up a copy of the Evening Standard. I had to go to the post office near me, and the Standard it feels completely flimsy. I mean, it doesn't feel like it used to at all. And I think we'll see that across the board. And you're already seeing publications folding sections into each other because they haven't got enough advertising, particularly the lifestyle ones, which are based on advertising revenue. I think we're really looking at a kind of existential crisis for quite a lot of the print media at the moment.
So I was asking about use of experts, saying that it seems to them that sort of the same people are wheeled out every across publications for sort of similar pieces. I mean, how do you guys go about finding sort of trusted experts, and how can someone become one for you?
A lot of the experts I use are either ones that have been put forward by PRs, or just through research, the old Twitter troll, or via charities.
Sorry, with my Women in Journalism head on, there's a very good list of female experts, because so many, I think it's like 80% of experts quoted tend to be men. And so there's been a big kind of push to get women to sign up to be kind of talking heads on particular subjects. Particularly kind of industry bodies, tend to put men up to speak about it. So if you're kind of interested in gender balance, there's a list of female experts. I think it's called the Female Expert List or something like that, where you can find different kinds of experts to talk about things.
And very often, if I can say, I think it's the case that your business is better, or your client's business is best, of course, and when things are coming up on the horizon that it may be that journalists, the media, don't know about at this stage, and to get in there and to actually say, look, can we point this out, and it's coming up, and we've got an expert here that can talk on this. They'll be grateful for A, that you flagged it up, B, that you provided an expert, and then once you've got that foot in the door, so to speak, that's how you keep going. I lost track of the number of people and organisations that would say, how come you use Fred and not me? And I'll say, because I don't know who you are, but I do now.
Yeah.
This question, the next one that's coming, is probably one for Matt. Some of our clients are having to pivot into new fields where we don't always have existing relationships with journalists or the magazines. How would you recommend building media relationships in lockdown when you can't go for a beer and donuts?
Well, it is a slightly trickier one. I think maybe I'd go back to my somewhat virtual stalking of Matt Reynolds on that. Just actually find out where the journalists are publishing, on which social platforms they're publishing their content as well, and maybe try and make contact, through those routes. I mean, obviously no one's going to recommend hounding journalists on Twitter or LinkedIn. But if you're looking for, genuine opportunities to engage, I saw you wrote about this. That was really interesting. I've got an idea about a story. Can we talk about it? Something along those lines might help. But the beer and donuts doesn't really work over Zoom, unfortunately. Well, it could do if anybody wants to take the time to do that. But I think it's, it just goes back to making sure you're reading around topics, thoroughly understanding the publications, and then going from there. Don't just rock up expecting people to listen because you've got half a story.
And I think if I could just follow on from that, I think that's really important about not stalking on Twitter, but like you said, in terms of understanding what they're tweeting about. Is it a personal Twitter account, or are they talking about work on there? Having that very clear definition. I think that's incredibly important. And if you get that tag in terms of you understand what they're tweeting about, you found that link, that's really powerful, because the journalists will sit there and understand that you've taken the time to understand them.
There's a couple of questions that are sort of linked together, or I'm going to link them together. Sort of people asking about sort of pitching at the moment, and whether journalists are interested in light-hearted pieces that aren't to do with coronavirus at all. There's quite a specific one about whether people are interested in travel stories from travel PRs. I guess for people that obviously for companies that haven't got anything that's particularly related to coronavirus, or are wanting to pitch something that's a bit more lighthearted, a bit more outside of it. I mean, how is that stuff that you journalists are interested in, and if so, how would you go about pitching it to you guys?
Go on with you.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I'm still definitely getting commissions of the non-coronavirus. I think of the coronavirus variety rather. I think it's particularly if you're working with outlets with longer lead times, they're going to be looking to be covering non-corona stuff that hasn't become dated before it's even gone to print. So I think it's just a case of really doing your research with whichever outlet you're pitching to.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think it's really knowing the slot that you're trying to pitch to and thinking about what it's going to be like then. But I do think it's difficult at the moment, particularly for magazines and things on long lead times. And I talked about tone earlier, that we really don't know where we're going to be. I was talking to someone at a fashion magazine who's saying they didn't think that the kind of September issue is going to kind of appear in, its usual format. I mean, all the rules have really been ripped up. So I think that kind of long-term commissioning is really difficult because you don't even know if kind of big movies or things that you might be linking things to are going to come out, or if things are going to be cancelled. So it's tricky. I'm a great believer as an editor in the very strong first-person narrative. And I think that probably those kind of great archetypal, kind of timeless personal stories are pretty good at the moment because they don't get too affected by events, events.
And I think whereas it's right to be cautious about, this is an item, non-coronavirus item, but it's got brevity and it's light and it might be slightly humorous. Ooh, how will it be seen if I put that out there? Well, yes, the newsrooms will decide on those levels. But hey, you only have to look at all the wonderful creativity that's going on out there with the videos and the memes and all kinds of things to see that as always, and I'm not going to be stereotypical and say we British, but everyone finds release in humour. Provided it's not attacking individuals or it's being distasteful, then I think that we all like a bit of a laugh and a chuckle and a light-hearted, a light story.
Yeah, and I think as much as people are interested in the coronavirus, it can get a bit overwhelming. And actually, I found it quite nice to sometimes read something where it's not mentioned or listen to something where it's not mentioned. It can be quite a nice release from it. There's probably a question for Ian. Someone's asking, have you seen editors of publications kind of change their messaging and the way that they sort of want to talk to the readers amid all of this? I've seen a few things on places like The Guardian where they're obviously changing their wording and things like that, or sort of explaining to readers and advertisers how they're wanting to talk to them during this time. What have you sort of observed on how sort of editors are changing their tone and messaging?
I think on various levels. I mean, we've seen it at the regional and local media. We've seen a lot of collaborations going on, reaching out to local authorities and others to work together to say with the community, like we're all in this together and we're all moving forward. As I say, I think there's been a lot more explanation taking place of why we feel we need to be lifting the lid on this and talking about this at this time, because it's important to actually do so, and a feeling also of, look, if we're going to have this play this part of trying to dampen down misrepresentation, misinformation, fake news, all about this, some of it can be quite harmful, then let's play our part in that, and let's do what we can to debunk those myths, or to certainly not give them the oxygen of publicity that they're actually seeking. That's there. There's been an awful lot of that, and leave that to social media where it's the Wild West, that stuff that's going on there. But I think this will continue. I imagine that most news editors and editors are thinking about how they can begin to adjust the news, because they will be aware that there is a sort of like fatigue that will set in from people, and they will be, like you were just saying there, that they will be looking for non-coronavirus stories. They want to know the headlines and they want to know the important stuff that affects them, but after that, can I have a bit of relief from it, please?
Mm-hmm. I think the other problem there, Ian, is that there is also that kind of daily cycle where you can almost see the kind of the kind of process of the news editor's brain where they're thinking, crikey, what is the headline for tomorrow? And so you get, today, so they're saying, a witty came out saying it's going to be a year till we're going to have social distancing for a year, and you could see them going, oh, well, we'll jump on that. And actually, it's a bit more nuanced than that, isn't it?
Yes.
We won't have social distancing in terms of total lockdown for a year, which is what a lot of people today have interpreted those as. So I think the media also has a responsibility to, even if it starts feeling, they're worried that people are getting a bit of fatigue or they're getting a bit sick of it, to kind of go on with the truth, which might be a bit more dreary, and not go for what looks like a kind of, a slightly flashy headline. I think there's a real responsibility on people now not to overramp things.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. As I said earlier on, part of the solution, not part of the problem, which is with those. And ironically, my daughter said here before that she's self-isolating with us, and she said, "Oh gosh, they've just said that we're going to be in lockdown for another year." And I said, "Really?" I think probably if you look at that, probably some forms of social distancing will exist and washing, all kinds of that. But I can't see us being in lockdown, and that's how it turned out to be, the nuancing. But the headline that she's read, and I'm not sure where that was came across as that. And you're absolutely right there, Eleanor. There is that there of this try not to you don't need to basically, exaggerate. Not that newspapers and media would ever exaggerate, of course. Attention.
Well, it's the old journalism maxim, isn't it? Simplify and exaggerate.
Go for the biggest number, always.
Yeah. But I think at the moment it's
people have said. How many people did you ask? 5.
Yeah. But I think it's at the moment, and I think that it behoves us all to kind of read through those. But I think that you are getting that a bit, particularly because there's a bit of fatigue creeping in. They want to kind of change the story, and often that's really not very helpful. And I think that editors at the moment have to be very mindful of just how concerned, worried, financially fragile and generally mentally fragile people are feeling out there, and really, really, really not exaggerate or make things more scary than they already are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we've just got time for fire one more question at you guys before we really need to wrap this up. People are asking, have you got any advice for advertisers during this time who don't want to come off as insensitive? I'm going to slightly roll another question in, which is, do you think that newspapers will want to reduce their reliance on advertising going forward after seeing, how much they've been impacted by declining it during this sort of pandemic?
Well, I don't think they're going to want to. I think they're going to have to because there's been a lot of advertising in it. There's also this problem that lots of advertisers don't want their adverts to appear against COVID-19 coverage. There's been this whole ad blocking campaign which the Society of Editors and others are trying to get lifted. I think that the real problem is that there's been a massive decline in the amount of advertising going into print products. It's all going online. We were talking earlier about Facebook and Google. Somewhere between 85 and 95% of all the advertising that appears online is going to Facebook and Google, even though it's news organisations who are producing a lot of the content that people are looking at, even though they go through those sites. So I think that going back, the point of this report is the state of the media. We've got a massive funding crisis in terms of news gathering and news production. So I'm sure that people will want to minimise their dependency on advertising. But the reality is at the moment that is still a massive part of the business models that people are operating on. I mean, I work for a Greek Times and the Sunday Times, which was one of the earliest ones to move to subscriptions and paywalls and all those kind of things. But we're still very reliant on the advertising. And that's not going to, that doesn't change overnight.
No, I think newspapers have obviously been trying to think of different ways, different models to reduce their reliance on advertising for many years. I don't think it's as simple as just overnight. Yeah,
or deciding that you want to. It's not as simple as that. It takes a long time. You have to have a super quality product that people think is worth paying for. That's not easy. And everywhere from the BBC kind of downwards, people are saying, there are question marks about how we pay for news gathering and for media. And I think that's worrying because it's never been more important to have trusted information.
And obviously quite a few sort of switched over to like events and things. Obviously that doesn't work at the moment either. So
no, events total disaster at the moment, and other kinds of revenue streams, around kind of making communities of your readers and getting them to pay things, wine clubs, all that kind of stuff. I mean, all newspapers are trying every wheeze they can possibly think of, but it's not the same. I mean, the advertising has been the model.
I think that's all we've got time for today, but thank you to everyone who has been listening in, and of course thank you to our panel. It's been great having you and really interesting to hear the outcome of the report. As a reminder, the State of Media Report Decision is launched today, so you can get your hands on that. Anyone who wants to listen again, it'll be ready on demand on Marketing Week. Thanks very much for listening, and